share the community guidelines. Just a quick view of the community guidelines one more time. I'm sure you know them well because we've already shown them quite a few times, but just know that this is a safe place, practice patience, speak from your personal experience and not for others, give everyone a chance to speak. If you disagree with someone, be respectful and try and understand their intent, and treat everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness as always. We're just going to hop right into our first presenter. And our first presenter is Rachel Fetko, and she'll be presenting on how Pfizer maintains superiority against competitors thanks to their elite financial strategies, and how they have earned their position by constantly creating innovative pharmaceuticals that aid the health of the world. So give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay. And here's Rachel's presentation.
My name is Rachel Fetko, and this is my presentation on Pfizer, the pharmaceutical industry's financial giant. To start off on the history of Pfizer, they were founded in 1849 in Brooklyn, New York by cousins Charles Pfizer and Charles Earhart. They were propelled forward by the Civil War, which doubled revenues, mainly because soldiers were wounded during the war and needed medicine to treat their wounds. In 1944, Pfizer became the world's largest producer of penicillin through a tedious process called deep tank fermentation, which required millions of dollars in investments as well as around-the-clock work to perfect. Attached is a picture of the process of deep tank fermentation, in which penicillin mold is taken and put into deep fermentation tanks with sugar and other ingredients in order to grow the penicillin. And then the penicillin product is separated from the mold, and that's what creates the penicillin antibiotic that we use. As a result of their success in the production of penicillin, Pfizer rapidly expanded globally. As you can see on the map, many of their locations are in Eastern Europe and across the United States. And as of 2019, they currently export products to more than 55 countries worldwide. Their types of products include drugs, antibiotics, and vaccines. Their earliest, most successful product was the antibiotic penicillin, which was mainly responsible for weakening the cell wall and causing bacteria to die, allowing for recovery from a bacterial infection. The company also created many other drugs and medicines, such as Advil, which is commonly heard of, amoxicillin, and of course, the most recent Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. So to go a little bit in on that COVID vaccine, it actually has not been approved or licensed by the FDA, but it has been authorized for emergency use to prevent the coronavirus disease. And as a result of Pfizer's efforts to quickly create this vaccine, they were actually successful in becoming a world leader in producing and manufacturing the most efficient vaccine out of all of the pharmaceutical companies with a 95% efficiency. And there was also trials done that showed that the vaccine was 95% effective against COVID-19 hospitalizations among fully vaccinated adults and 64% effective among partially vaccinated adults. Pfizer has presented many opportunities for growth, with some of the most impactful being their improvements to research and development, as well as their expanding and emerging international markets. The company has a big opportunity for growth if they focus their research and development resources on high-value disease areas, such as oncology, pain, diabetes, and immunology. These specific high-value disease areas often represent areas of significant unmet medical need, high market growth potential, and areas where Pfizer may be first or best in class. I attached a picture that shows Pfizer's research and development spending between 2017 and 2020. And you can see that in 2019, in their fourth quarter, was when they had the highest research and development spending. I was kind of expecting 2020 to be higher in research spending, but um, it ended up that 2019 they actually spent a significant amount more than they did in 2020. So they also have a large opportunity for growth in terms of emerging markets in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Pfizer claims that they plan to expand their operations into China by growing established products, launching new products, and reaching more patients so that they can capitalize in China and make more money off of that. Some threats and challenges that Pfizer faces include market risks, which includes in itself foreign exchange risks, interest risk, and equity price risk. So, as far as foreign exchange risk is concerned, Pfizer has a significant portion of revenues and earnings exposed to changes in exchange rates. Apart from that, the interest-bearing investments and borrowings of Pfizer are subject to interest rate risk, depending on market conditions, which are, of course, frequently fluctuating. The final market risk occurs when the company holds equity securities and becomes subject to equity price risk, which can increase the volatility of their income in future periods because of the changes in the fair value of equity investments. So, of course, the investments of stockholders and shareholders affect their money in the end. Although all of these market risks pose a challenge for Pfizer, the expected adverse impact on the company's net income because of these risks is quite insignificant. It wouldn't detrimentally affect their company. Other minor challenges for the company include developmental setbacks, such as failures in clinical trials and adverse reactions to their medications. These challenges exist for the company. They have had instances where they had to quit trials and quit the development of certain medications because they weren't successful in their trials. So that has been an obstacle for them, but it hasn't been anything that has adversely affected the company. Pfizer has executed a number of sustainability measures in order to remain ahead of their competitors. These sustainability measures include enhancing their operational practices through what they call strong corporate governance, which sustains them by promoting the long-term interests of shareholders. So basically, they maintain and enhance this corporate governance by consistently refining their policies and procedures to accommodate these shareholders and stockholders. Apart from enhancing their operational practices, Pfizer also strives to meet environmental health goals as a sustainability measure for their company. They claim that their environmental sustainability measures focus on three aspects: reducing carbon emissions, increasing water efficiency, and looking for innovative ways to minimize waste. So I'm going to show a little bit about one of the ways that the pharmaceutical companies and their products can adversely affect the environment and, in the end, our drinking water, but more importantly, the water for our marine life. So it starts, of course, in the production. It becomes distributed. There's improper disposal of it. Not only that, but 70% of medications are excreted through urine and feces. So basically, anybody who's taking medications is excreting them, and it's ending up back into the environment, going through sewage treatments. Even when they put them through the water filters, the particles still remain. So then it gets into the livestock and the poultry, and in the end, it gets in our drinking water, but it also affects all of the animals in the process. So what they're doing for their environmental sustainability, in 2012, they set a baseline goal to achieve by 2020. And this was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 20%, reduce the amount of waste disposed by 15%, and reduce water withdrawal by 5%. They successfully achieved this goal and actually exceeded it with a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 33%, the amount of waste disposed by 15%, and water withdrawal by 19%. I also here attached a picture that shows the frequency of detection in percentage of pharmaceutical pollutants in total river water samples. This was a sample of 30 rivers, and it shows, of course, high numbers of pharmaceuticals that were found in those rivers. So that was just something that I found interesting. A new goal that Pfizer set from a 2019 baseline is to be achieved by 2030 is to become carbon neutral with a 46% absolute reduction in direct emissions. On to the financial performance of Pfizer, which can be determined by a financial analysis that looks at the financing, investing, and operating decisions that create net income. There are 5 key questions for analysis and corresponding ratios for each question. These 5 key ratios used to analyze and make business decisions are liquidity ratios, profitability ratios, solvency ratios, asset management ratios, and market analysis ratios. I attached a picture that just shows the importance of the ratio analysis, which helps in understanding the profitability of the company, an analysis of operational efficiency of the firms, liquidity of the firms. It helps in identifying the business risks of the firm, and so forth. So, starting with liquidity ratios, they are responsible for determining a company's ability to pay debt obligations. There are 3 main calculations that can determine liquidity, which are the net working capital, the current ratio, and the quick ratio. Here I have a table which shows each of those ratios, their formulas to calculate them, and then for 2020 and 2019's financial statements is the amount of money. So basically this table just shows that in 2020, Pfizer had an increase in all 3 of their liquidity ratios, but most significantly in net working capital. The current ratio was a major improvement, with the table showing that in 2020, Pfizer had $1.35 of current assets to cover $1 of current liabilities, whereas in 2019, the company only had 88 cents of current assets to cover $1 of liabilities. Although the numbers for the quick ratio could be slightly better for their financial statements, it was an improvement from their previous year, which it was only 44 cents in 2019. So profitability ratios are the second kind of financial analysis ratios that help in business decision making, and they are key in understanding a company's ability to earn profits from sales or operations. They determine gross profit percentage and net income percentage, which I have included the formulas for, and also from the financial statements of Pfizer for 2019 and 2020. So you can see in the table, I also have a graph I'm going to show you, but you can see in the table that the gross profit percentage for 2020 was slightly lower than in 2019. And the net income percentage for 2020 was lower than in 2019. In terms of the gross profit percentage, the higher the percentage, the more profit that the company is taking home. Therefore, the higher the number, the better. This table shows that Pfizer was taking in less profit in 2019 than they were in 2020. And I will show you the graph that exemplifies that they were taking in less profit in 2020. You can see that in 2019 it starts higher, and then it gradually moves down from the gross margin and the net margin. Solvency ratios are responsible for measuring the ability of a company to pay its long-term liabilities, such as debt and interest on debt. Solvency ratios are measured through debt ratios and interest coverage ratios, which I have attached the formulas for as well. And basically, the debt ratio is the ratio of a company's total liabilities to its total assets, and it's responsible for measuring their ability to pay their debts. The interest coverage ratio is the ratio of income from operations to interest expense, which measures the ability of a business to pay the interest on its debt. So the table shows that the debt ratio in 2020 was less than that of 2019. The debt ratio of 59% means that 59% of the company's assets are financed with liabilities, and the other 41% are financed with stockholders' equity. The decrease in the debt ratio between 2019 and 2020 is a positive trend for Pfizer, since a lower debt ratio means that the company has more assets than debt. The interest coverage ratio also shows Pfizer on a positive trend from 2019 to 2020. The ratio of 7.0 in 2020 means that the company has $7 of operating profit for every $1 of interest expense. The next important set of ratios is the asset management ratios. They are responsible for making business decisions that are indicating how successfully a company is utilizing their assets to generate revenues. The most commonly used ratios within this group are the accounts receivable turnover ratio, the inventory turnover ratio, the fixed asset turnover ratio, the total asset turnover ratio, and the return on assets. I won't go too far into detail on this, but let's just say that there is kind of a skew of numbers here and it is a bit jumbled up, but I did attach a graph that shows basically Pfizer's inventory turnover rate compared to the industry average over a number of years, which is just showing that Pfizer was a lot lower compared to their competitors. So the last set is the market analysis ratios, which determine if the company is generating enough net income to reward the stockholders for the use of their money. So this basically just makes sure that the company can pay their stockholders and their shareholders. And some of these numbers are skewed and they do range a little bit, but it's good to note here that the return on equity measures how much profit a company generates with the money shareholders have invested. So their number for this isn't necessarily bad, but it may raise red flags for investors who want to see profits from their money. So basically that wraps everything up. Just a conclusion of Pfizer. Their pharmaceutical products have a significant impact on both our people and our planet in positive and negative ways. And that presents Pfizer with many opportunities and challenges. But despite any negative impacts, Pfizer has begun to execute sustainability measures, most importantly for the environment, to ensure that they can get people their medications without adversely affecting our marine life and us also. So finally, the financial analysis ratios and the financial statements just summarize that the company had more revenues in 2020 than they did in 2019. However, they were more profitable in 2019 than they were in 2020. And here is my works cited in case anybody would like to see where I got my information from. And I will be open to taking questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. That was an excellent presentation. We are going to go into a live Q&A, so if anyone does have any questions, you can go ahead and ask now or put them down in the chat and I can read them. So does anyone have any questions right now?
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Is there a certain type of medication which they produce which is most profitable?
I actually did not go into that to see what was most profitable, but I do know that the penicillin that they first created was kind of their most popular, that threw them into success. So I'm not sure currently what their most popular would be as far as revenues and profits goes, but penicillin was definitely their main starter.
I have a question. Nice job. Really good
Thank
job
you.
on that. Yeah, very interesting. So I know like in Europe, I know they're heavily involved in Europe. And sorry, I've got construction going, so it's kind of loud here. But I was curious about, because the AstraZeneca was put on hold and then it was, brought back again. I'm wondering, are they going to be supplying to Europe in any time, since they are in Europe pretty heavily? Are they going to be providing vaccines to Europe?
Yes, I believe they are. I was reading that with the vaccine in particular, the fact that it's not approved yet has kind of caused some issues with them supplying to Europe in some way. But they have been working to supply Europe and also China, because they are not currently working with China, but they do see like profits and revenues and more money that they have in those countries.
Thanks.
My question for you is, I know that Pfizer, before the pandemic, I obviously didn't really know the name Pfizer. It wasn't very big, and I know that a lot of people do now. Was the company something you were interested in before they came out with the vaccine, or was just the kind of the global climate what got you interested in it?
Yeah, it was just the global climate, basically. I didn't really hear much about them prior to this either, but I was kind of interested when I found out that they've been operating for 172 years and nobody had really heard of them until now. So that was something that kind of made my research more interesting to me, because it was like something that's really big right now, but that nobody really knew anything about.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Do we have any more questions for Rachel? Okay, so thank you so much. That was awesome. For our next presenter, we have Michelle Kim, who will be doing a presentation on how smoking affects the body and the ability to absorb nutrients and vitamins. So give me 1 second to share my screen again. Okay, here is Michelle's presentation.
My name is Michelle Kim, and I am currently attending Miracosta Community College, and my presentation will be about tobacco and nutrition. So I think we all know what tobacco is, and it's a plant that is dried and fermented for tobacco products. There are over 7,000 chemicals in tobacco smoke. Research and science has already claimed that hundreds of these chemicals are known to be able to harm you. Examples would be formaldehyde, lead, arsenic, even hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide.
Christine, I can't. I don't know if other people can. Are other people having trouble?
With what? I'm sorry?
I'm not able to hear the presentation very well. I don't know. Other people hear it okay?
It is a little quiet on my end too.
I'm not sure how to turn up the volume.
Okay. Well, if people can hear it, I'll just, maybe my volume's not maxed out. I'll give it a try.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
People are in there. It's also important to note that tobacco products often have nicotine, which is an extremely addictive chemical that often keeps people from quitting smoking and consumption of these products. There have been many illnesses and health effects that are caused by smoking. We know this not only through research, but by experiences all around the world. Cigarette smoke can permanently damage your blood vessels and heart, making plaque build up in your arteries. The list of diseases caused by tobacco is very long, and I've listed some of them here. So, heart disease is known to be a huge risk from smoking, as it makes plaque build up in your arteries. Cancer, there's many types of cancers that are linked to smoking, and diabetes. What I want to focus on in this presentation is nutrition absorption. There's been a relationship between nutrition absorption and smoking. Studies have shown that a correlation between the body's ability to intake nutrients and vitamins. Smokers may need more of certain nutrients because of how tobacco depletes their body's capability of absorption. As a result, smokers may lose function in their muscles and other parts of the body. Nutritional deficiencies are not limited to the body's ability to absorb nutrients. Smokers may also find themselves malnourished because of a change in appetite. Tobacco and nicotine has the ability to influence a person's appetite, which could then change their diet entirely. Various studies show that cigarette smoking causes multiple nutritional implications. An understanding of the relationship between the two can prevent non-smokers from starting tobacco or cigarettes. An understanding can also help cigarette smokers and tobacco users from continuing their addiction to nicotine. Smoking makes it harder for the body to absorb calcium, which is very necessary to keep your bones healthy and strong. As a result, it can be observed that smokers have an overall lower bone density and bone mass. Their bone mass may decrease, which would make your bones more susceptible to breaking and fracturing. According to recent research, smokers took 62% more time to heal from bone fractures than non-smokers. Additionally, smokers may find it difficult to absorb vitamin C, and it's one of the reasons that smokers have an overall weaker immune system. We also need vitamin C to repair cells in nearly every part of the body. This ranges from skin cells to ligaments to blood vessels, basically everywhere. It also helps with the regeneration of antioxidants. Although vitamin C has not seen a direct correlation with cancer, it was discovered that a diet in vitamin C reduced the risk of lung cancer in female smokers by 26%. Unfortunately, for non-smokers, secondhand smoke from cigarettes and tobacco products can reduce the amount of vitamin C in their bodies. So if you're around a person that smokes a lot, or if you're around cigarette smoke often, you should make sure that your diet is high in vitamin C. According to research, smokers need about 35 milligrams more vitamin C than the average non-smoker. Similar to vitamin C, vitamin E helps with antioxidants, and it also helps keep the immune system strong and healthy. It does so by building red blood cells. As a result, your body is able to fight off harmful bacteria and viruses. More importantly, though, research has observed that it protects people from cancer and heart disease. Smoking exposes people to free radical damage. Free radicals are molecules and compounds that are linked to diseases and illnesses. If the amount of them is too high in your body, they can create many chronic health issues. When cells are attacked by free radicals, they go through oxidative stress. This is why we need antioxidants like vitamin E. Antioxidants help defend the body and keep the free radicals at a healthy and sustainable amount. You can see in this image that I included the effects of oxidative stress that a normal cell would go through. It also shows the effects and side effects of oxidative stress. So they can cause cancer, vision loss, heart disease, arthritis, stroke, respiratory disease, immune deficiency, emphysema, and so many more issues. The nicotine in cigarettes can also suppress a person's appetite as it interferes with the brain. Foods start to taste different as the central nervous system is altered, and flavors begin to taste different. As a result, smokers may make their own decision to eat less food or change their diet because they interpret foods differently. A healthy and diverse diet is very important to maintaining your health. So once smokers quit smoking, they are able to enjoy more foods, improving their overall diet as they're able to taste a more diverse spectrum of flavors. The circulatory system is made up of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and the heart. It's necessary to allow oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and more important chemicals to cells throughout the body. The blood gathers nutrients from the foods we consume and delivers them to cells while circulating around the body through the complex networks of arteries, veins, and capillaries. Tobacco smoke raises blood pressure and blood vessels tighten. This is because the cells in your lungs swell up from the smoke. This causes your lungs to produce excess mucus, which clogs your airways. Additionally, chemicals in cigarette smoke increases plaque in blood vessels. This may create clots in arteries and severely constrict blood flow. Blood vessels may become less able to transport blood cells around. This means that it's more difficult for blood cells to deliver nutrients and essential chemicals around the body. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. That was awesome. We are going to go into our live Q&A right now. So does anyone have any questions right off the bat for Michelle?
I have a question. So you said that the nicotine suppresses your appetite, and then basically if you quit, a lot of people get their appetite back. When you were doing your research, do you know if there's been people who like don't get their appetite back at all, who have been like affected in the long run by it?
Yeah, so when you quit smoking, your appetite doesn't come back immediately. There's also a lot of times where people will go through withdrawal, and it might be even more difficult to eat and take care of yourself. But overall, the majority of people, when they completely get nicotine out of their system, they're able to enjoy a better diet.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one question for you. What is, this was obviously a very interesting topic and there has been a lot of research on it. Do you plan to have any future research goals for this specific topic?
Well, I do find this topic very interesting, and I think it's important that we learn more about it so people know how to take care of themselves if they're still addicted to tobacco products. So in the future, I would be willing to find more nutrients and vitamins that smokers might find difficult to obtain. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? You can put them in chat if you'd like, or just ask them straight out.
May I ask one question? Are there any actual known benefits of smoking on the body?
I do know that back in the day, there were a lot of outdated medical prescriptions where doctors would prescribe a cigarette to patients, but those have long been debunked, and I don't think any doctor recommends smoking. But there are definitely a lot of adverse effects compared to positive effects.
Quick follow-up on that. Do you think there would be an interesting research opportunity in looking at ways to get off of cigarettes or ways to get off of that kind of harmful nicotine?
I think that research into getting out of the nicotine addiction is crucial to improving the overall health of our population, because we always have these campaigns going around to prevent teenagers from starting nicotine and smoking, because the long-term effects of smoking and nicotine are very serious. And so I do think that it's important that we do more research to prevent nicotine and help people recover from it.
Okay. And do you think that those campaigns do make a big difference to help people quit their addictions?
I do think for some people it does help inform them and make them aware of how harmful addictions can be. But I do think that there are a lot of people that undermine their claims and warnings. So there probably is a good amount of people that are influenced, and there probably is a good amount that aren't as well.
Okay. Do we have any more last minute questions for Michelle?
May I ask one more question? Is nicotine the main reason that smoking has become so widespread, or is there another factor such as societal pressures or something like this?
There are definitely a lot of societal pressures that encourage people to smoke more. A lot of business related issues. You can see smoking as a social event. So a lot of businessmen find themselves with nicotine addictions for their own social reasons within the business.
All right. If that is our last question, thank you so much, Michelle, for your presentation. That was awesome. Now that Paige is here, we can continue on to her presentation. And Paige will be giving a presentation on the CRISPR/Cas9 system and how it is used to edit plant genomes to improve quality and yields in crops, as well as its resistance against disease and its adaptation to different weather conditions. So again, let me just share my screen. Okay, and here's Paige's presentation.
Hello, my name is Paige, and today I will be presenting on the CRISPR-Cas9 system, a gene editing tool for crops. What is CRISPR-Cas9? CRISPR stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. Cas9 is the CRISPR-associated protein 9. Pictured on the right are Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, the pioneers of the CRISPR-Cas9 system. Their research started out studying the immune systems of Streptococcus pyogenes. In the bacteria's defense system, they found a protein, the Cas9 protein, that was responsible for cutting and dismantling foreign DNA. What they couldn't figure out was how the protein found the DNA. It wasn't until Charpentier's discovery of tracer RNA that brought together the CRISPR-Cas9 system. Together, Doudna and Charpentier developed the CRISPR-Cas9 system in 2011. Their discoveries earned them the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020. So how does it all work? Tracer RNA and CRISPR RNA are fused together to form a guide RNA. CRISPR is programmed with a specific DNA code. CRISPR will then locate the matching code in the DNA sequence of the cell, and the Cas9 protein will make the cut. The DNA can repair itself by a process known as non-homologous end joining, NHEG, shown in Part A of this diagram. This repairing process leaves out the genome sequence that was cut by the Cas9 protein. Another method of repair is known as homology-directed repair, HDR, shown in Part B of this diagram. In this repair method, a template with a different DNA sequence can be inserted into the DNA to change the genome. The benefits of CRISPR versus other gene editing tools is that it is inexpensive, user-friendly, and is life-changing technology, literally. Because this technology is still fairly new, there is, of course, room for improvement. However, the CRISPR-Cas9 system has proven to be successful in editing the genomes in plants. The CRISPR-Cas9 system can potentially replace current gene editing technology, such as zinc finger nucleases, CFNS, or transcription activator like effector nucleases, TALENs. CRISPR-Cas9 could even replace genetically modified organisms, GMOs. These previously used techniques are more complex, expensive, and less efficient than the CRISPR-Cas9 system. Researchers have discovered that editing the genomes in plants can lead to improved traits such as better yields, resistance to abiotic stress, resistance to pathogens, and herbicide tolerance. First, researchers must identify which genes are responsible for, let's say, the amount of fruits a plant can produce. Once the gene has been identified, it is programmed into CRISPR, and it will lead the Cas9 protein to that part of the sequence in the plant's DNA. By altering or removing the gene completely, the plant will be able to, in theory, produce more fruits. But why is there a desire to produce a higher yield in crops? By 2050, the human population will grow to be greater than 9 billion people. With an ever-growing population, there will be an increase in demand for food. There must be a way to compensate for the higher demand. As you can see in this chart, countries like India and China will have to continue to provide for more than 1 billion people. In order to effectively provide food for this large amount of people, there will need to be a mechanism to increase crop productivity. Along with a growing population, crops will need to adapt to a changing climate. Abiotic stress like drought and extreme temperatures make it difficult for crops to thrive. This may affect their ability to produce high yields or even survive. As climate changes, crops will need to adapt to an environment they would normally not survive, and researchers have discovered there might be a way to help. By editing specific genes, crops can adapt to a changing climate. By altering the genome of plants, researchers have been able to identify the genes that are affected by undesirable conditions, cut the gene out of the DNA sequence, and allow for the plants to produce better crop yields and adapt to the changing climate. Drought, extreme temperatures, oxygen levels, and soil toxicity all affect the productivity of crops. One study shows the knockout of the PYL1, 4, and 6 genes produced a high heat tolerance for rice. The addition of ARGOS8 gene in maize produced a higher grain yield in drought conditions. In soybean, the knockout of DRB2A and DRB2B resulted in a tolerance to drought as well as salinity. The removal or alteration of these abiotic stress-related genes allow for the crops to adapt to environmental factors such as drought and high temperatures that would normally affect the productivity and lifespan of crops. Pathogens, like bacteria, viruses, and fungus, can affect plants just as they do humans. Researchers have discovered that by disrupting S genes in plants, it helps build an immune response to bacteria, viruses, and fungi. The CRISPR-Cas9 system is used to minimize the effects pathogens have on the plant's ability to survive. The OSERF922 gene disruption was shown to prevent blast lesions, a common fungal disease in rice. The disruption of SLPMR4 in tomato resulted in a partial resistance to mildew. The disruption of these S genes will enable crops to build an immune defense against common diseases and also prevent the spread of disease amongst the crops to ensure a higher level of productivity. Herbicides are used to control weeds that compete with the crop's access to water and nutrients. Herbicides have the ability to bind, which means the crops are absorbing these harmful chemicals. CRISPR-Cas system is used to create a tolerance against herbicides, used hoping to only affect the surrounding weeds. The editing of the ALS and EPSPS genes have shown that they enable the plants to resist the binding of the herbicides. This creates for a healthier crop, free of herbicides, and can help with an increased production and lifespan. Editing the nutritional value of crops can be beneficial to humans. People who are gluten intolerant or malnourished can benefit from these studies. The knockout of alpha-gliadine reduced the amount of gluten found in wheat. The knockout of ZMLPK reduces the phytate content, which helps aid in digestion. And the disruption of the FAD2 gene increased the amount of oleic acid found in oilseed crop. Being able to genetically alter the genes of plants to produce a higher nutritional value is important to human health. With an increase in crop productivity, along with an increase in nutritional value, the CRISPR-Cas9 system proves to be an effective way to support an increasing population. Here are some specific examples of CRISPR-Cas9 system being used in plants. In tomatoes, the knockout of the SLMPK20 decreased the amount of sugar metabolized in the fruit, which gives it a sweeter taste. The knockout of SLALMT9 decreases the malate content, which gives fruit a tart taste. SLER, SP5G, and SP genes were edited to alter the length of the tomato stems and the flowering process. After editing nearly 140 different lines, researchers saw improved traits such as larger fruit size, increased number of fruits, and higher vitamin C content. This proves that CRISPR-Cas9 has the potential to develop crops with high yields and better nutrition. Another application of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing was used in rice crops. The knockout of GW2, GW5, and TGW6 resulted in larger grain size and weight. Mutations of OSHD2, OSHD4, and OSHD5 allowed grains to mature early. The mutation of CLVTA3 increased the number of seeds and grain weight when compared to wild rice. This will aid in crop productivity and will be beneficial to an increasing population. The study of CRISPR-edited rice has been mentioned numerous times throughout this research because rice is a staple crop in many countries. These improved traits in rice may be crucial to a larger population in the future. So what does this mean for the future? Because of an ever-growing population and constant climate change, the CRISPR-Cas9 system can help food insecurity in countries that rely heavily on crops, like rice grains and wheat, for survival. By increasing nutritional value, greater production, and adaptation to changing climates, this can ensure crops' ability to provide for an increasing population. This system has proven to be effective and efficient and is moving forward to the next step in cultivating disease-resistant and climate-tolerant crops around the world. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, so thank you so much for that awesome presentation, Paige. We're going to go into our live Q&A. So if anyone has any questions right now, you can go ahead and ask or put them in the chat.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So you were saying that it increases nutritional value and crop productivity, but I'm wondering if there's any like health problems or, the opposite of like a nutritional value. If there's like any, problems with editing the genes of the plants and the crops.
Yeah, I saw nothing really negative about that as far as how it would affect a human. I know it is compared to GMOs, where GMOs, they use like different DNA from different species completely and insert it into the plants, and that's how it becomes a genetically modified organism. And as far as I know, I don't think it's considered the same thing, but I'm not completely sure.
Okay, thank you.
My question for you is, I know that you talked about how they use this on a research-based, how they got all this info from that. Do you know if these have been implemented in any kind of public scale? Like, has it been released to the public farmers yet?
I don't think so yet. I think this was all just experimenting.
Okay.
I haven't seen anything about it being done on a large scale yet, but I think that's where they're going with it, or hoping to go with it.
Awesome.
I have one. Do you know if there's any sort of an international ethics panel or anything for the application of CRISPR technology?
And it's a big thing right now. It hasn't been regulated or anything, so it's kind of still a little controversial, especially being used in human cells, which is why I wanted to focus on the plant cells first, because I feel like if they can perfect it in plants, then eventually they might be able to use it more regulated in human cells.
One more question. Is there any specific thing that got you interested in this topic?
I saw that Doudna and Charpentier won it for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and I'm also interested in conservation genetics. So a little bit of genetic information there. I don't have like a huge background in genetics yet, but I just thought it was interesting and maybe even could be used in something like conservation genetics. So.
Absolutely. All right. Do we have any last questions for Paige?
May I ask one quick one?
Yeah.
Would genetically modified plants have any different effects on the soil?
On the soil?
Yes.
That is a really good question. I do not know. Sorry.
That would be a great place for future research, I'm sure. Okay, and if that was our last question, we're going to move on to our last presenter, and that is Gerard Decker, who will be giving us a presentation on the investigation of how a 1960s pharmaceutical drug disaster led to the discovery and stereochemical isomers function differently in the human body. Okay, give me 1 second to share my screen again. Okay, and here is Gerard's presentation.
Decker, and I will be presenting the 1960s thalidomide catastrophe. My mentor is Eleni Tross, and this was a part of the Chemistry 211 honors course. In advance, I'd like to apologize for the Activate Windows watermark in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, as I cannot get rid of that at the moment. Alright, so this research will be presenting the 1960s thalidomide catastrophe involving the creation, distribution, and recall of the thalidomide drug. Now, the drug itself was marketed as a sedative intended to ease morning sickness felt by pregnant women. However, unfortunately, the drug proved to be disastrous, causing one of the severest cases of birth defects seen in newborns today. Although the exact biological cause of these birth defects are still not fully understood, recent research has really furthered the link between the abnormal limb developments we've seen in newborns whose mothers took the drug and the stereochemistry of the thalidomide molecule. So that will be discussed in the following slides. Now, my overall research goal here is to confirm the importance of stereochemistry in engineering new medications and furthering pharmaceutical research. Alright, so here's just a brief outline of what the research will be covering. So to begin with, in 1953, the drug was first synthesized by a Swiss company known as CIBA without any medical purpose, and it actually wouldn't be until 1956 that a West German company known as Grünenthal had got a hold of the drug. Now, at first, they began experimenting with the drug in search of anti-epileptic properties, but instead they found that the drug had sedative properties. So after screening high dosages of the drug in mice, they were able to assume the safety of its consumption, and they found no LD50. Now, all an LD50 is a measurement of how poisonous a drug is. It's the amount of thalidomide that could be ingested before 50% of the sampled organisms, in this case the mice, had died. So with no LD50 established, the drug had successfully passed the regulation process at the time, which, as you can see, was pretty underdeveloped. So the drug was then distributed to throughout 46 different countries worldwide, but mostly in Europe, under different names, including thalidomide, Contagen, and Distaval. And as a side note, it actually wasn't distributed to the United States because Frances Kensley, a female FDA worker, had declined the drug's entrance in suspicion that it had caused neuropathy. So in 1961, as increasingly more used the drug, more and more reported incidents of extreme teratogenesis, which is simply a hiccup in the limb development process, and mortality had been observed among physicians. So with up to 10,000 cases observed, obstetrician Dr. McBride and geneticist Dr. Lenz had began research on the link between these malformations in newborns and their mother's consumption of the sedative drug. And they were quickly able to establish a link between these malformations and the birth effects. So in 1961, the drug was immediately pulled from the market, first in England and then worldwide. So as a prerequisite to understanding stereochemistry, it's important to understand chirality. And all chirality is a qualitative property of objects. So a set of objects are considered to be chiral if and only if the two objects are mirror images of one another and they're non-superimposable. So looking at these set of hands here, we see that they are indeed mirror images of each other and they cannot be superimposed. If one were to take the left hand and overlap it with the right hand, we would see that they wouldn't produce or form the same object. And now, while you might think rotating the left hand onto the right hand or vice versa would produce an overlap, they still wouldn't be considered the same object because they're facing different directions. Now, if we take a look at these flasks here, we can clearly see that they are achiral because while they are mirror images, the two flasks can be superimposed onto each other. So let's apply chirality to organic molecules. Now, all an organic molecule is a molecule with at least one carbon-hydrogen bond, contrary to the belief that it's a molecule that's naturally synthesized in an organism. So if we take a look at bromochlorofluoromethane here and dichlorofluoromethane, both of them would be considered organic molecules because they have at least one carbon-hydrogen bond. Now, the carbon atom is implied by the vertice here, because in organic chemistry, we use vertices to imply the presence of a carbon atom rather than physically drawing it out. Now, all a stereoisomer is a set of chiral organic molecules. So if we take a look at bromochlorofluoromethane, the two versions shown would be considered stereoisomers because they are chiral. We can see that they are mirror images of each other, and they are non-superimposable even after a 180-degree rotation. So they would be considered stereoisomers. And they actually would be considered different molecules as well. So while they would both definitely be considered bromochlorofluoromethane, they are considered two different stereoisomers of bromochlorofluoromethane. Now, if we take a look at dichlorofluoromethane, we can see that they are not stereoisomers because they are achiral. So if we take a look at the set here, we can see that they, while indeed they are mirror images of each other, they can be superimposed after a 180-degree rotation. So they are not stereoisomers. Now, going back to stereoisomers, we can actually give each stereoisomer in a set a specific name. Now, using the system known as the Kahn-Ingold Prelog naming system, what we do is we take a look at the order in which each atom surrounds the chiral center, and we rank their molecular weights. And by doing that, we can give each stereoisomer a title R and S. And when we have a set of stereoisomers which differ at one chiral center, we can actually call the set a set of enantiomers. So these two stereoisomers of bromochloromethane are considered enantiomers. We have the R enantiomer and the S enantiomer. So now let's take a look at the actual thalidomide molecule. So if we take a look here, we can see that we have the R enantiomer and the S enantiomer. So after further research was done, Dr. Lenz and other researchers discovered that thalidomide, specifically only one enantiomer of thalidomide, had been causing the severe malformations in the human embryo between approximately 20 to 36 days after fertilization. And that was the S enantiomer. So while the R enantiomer was effectively sedative and had the intended effect of easing morning illness in pregnant women, the S enantiomer had been causing the embryonic malformations. And for the first time in the pharmaceutical world ever, researchers had discovered that two isomers of the same drug can take drastically different biological pathways in the body and have different observed effects. So you might be wondering, well, if it was the S enantiomer that had been responsible for those malformations, and it was the R enantiomer that had been responsible for the intended sedative effect of thalidomide, then why hadn't the researchers simply isolated the R enantiomer and administered only the R enantiomer? And the reason they couldn't was because at physiological pH and the temperature provided by an organism's body, the R enantiomer can actually rapidly interconvert back and forth between its S and R configurations, so this makes even the consumption of the R enantiomer highly hazardous for pregnant women. So now let's examine how exactly the S enantiomer induces teratogenicity. So in general, thalidomide is an immunomodulatory drug, or an IMID, meaning it has a specific functional group that allows it to bind to the target, the cerebron protein. So this cerebron protein is abbreviated as CRBN and shown as dark green here. And what it does is when joined by a canonical substrate, simply a substrate that's naturally produced within the body, it will bind to this pocket here, known as the tri-TRP pocket. Now, what will happen is it'll form this CRBN Col4 complex, which is simply the name we give for the arrangement of proteins formed once this substrate will bind. And once joined by ubiquitin factors, which are represented by these orange circles here, the E2 proteasome is actually going to degrade this substrate and recycle its materials. So this allows the cell to conserve energy and conserve precious materials when a particular substrate isn't being used in the cell at a specific time. So what's important about this process here is that cell 4 will not be affected by the binding of the substrate to the CRBN protein. Because the substrate takes the place of this binding site, cell 4 will not take the place of the binding site, and it'll simply continue along and regulate gene transcription. Now, as for what it specifically regulates, cell 4 will serve as a regulator of gene transcription for specific key transcription factors that are needed for embryonic development. So in other words, cell 4 will be needed to produce those key proteins for limb development. So in the presence of an immunomodulatory drug, however, we see that thalidomide will be binding to the CRBN protein, and specifically S enantiomer will bind to it. Now, while the R enantiomer will still technically bind to the protein, as confirmed by a study in 2018 with zebrafish cells, the S enantiomer will bind with an affinity that's 10 times stronger than the R enantiomer. And when that happens, it's going to change the CRBN conformation or structure in such a drastic way that cell 4 is now going to be able to join this complex. And when we have cell 4 joining the complex and the ubiquitin factors subsequently joining, the E2 proteasome is now going to degrade that cell 4 protein. And as a result, we won't have that essential regulator of gene transcription, so those key proteins needed for limb development won't be produced. And in turn, we will observe teratogenicity. So going back to this binding here, while only the S enantiomer will induce this biological pathway, the R enantiomer can once again interconvert into the S enantiomer and induce the pathway. Now, this means that this once again confirms that consumption of either enantiomer or even a racemic mixture of thalidomide is highly hazardous for pregnant women. So now let's take a brief look at how exactly thalidomide is synthesized today. So after experimentation with new reagents, pharmaceutical companies have been able to optimize the original synthetic pathway used by Grunenthal to manufacture thalidomide. So in general, in organic chemistry, a synthetic pathway, such as the one shown here, is simply a stepwise procedure showing what reagents or chemicals and solvents we need to add into a flask of our starting material to create our target molecule. Now in this case, our starting material is phthalic anhydride, and our target molecule is, of course, thalidomide. So often a synthesis will include some intermediates because there isn't simply one reagent that we can add to our starting material to directly convert into our target molecule. And in general, the less intermediates we have, the better, because after each intermediate step in the synthetic pathway, we're going to lose some of our yield due to natural error. So looking at this synthetic pathway, because only one intermediate is used, it's going to have a relatively high yield. And we could see that as after multiple trials, we'll obtain a maximum yield of about 56%. Now, in addition to this relatively high yield, this synthesis starts with phthalic anhydride, which is relatively inexpensive, about 20 cents per gram, depending on the supplier, the packing, its purity, and some other factors. Now, on top of that, we also have the fact that this synthesis doesn't use many in fact, it uses no toxic solvents. So we have pyridine here, and we have ammonium acetate as our solvents for steps A and B respectively, and these are relatively non-toxic. So running this reaction on a higher scale won't be as environmentally damaging as the Grunenthal synthesis. So how exactly is thalidomide being used today? Well, thalidomide has actually found multiple uses in the medical field, despite its teratogenetic effects. So having 4 acyl groups, or 4 C double bonded O groups, as seen here, and having 2 amide groups, this allows thalidomide to have a diverse range of biochemical pathways as seen in the photo. And as a stimulator of the immune system, for example, thalidomide is considered to be an immunomodulatory, which means it promotes T cell activation and the rupturing of cancer cells. In addition, thalidomide has found its way in treatment of multiple myeloma. Now, multiple myeloma is a form of cancer in plasma cells. Plasma cells are a type of white blood cell found in bone marrow, which once cancerous can release abnormal antibodies and kidney damage, and thereby weaken the immune system. So in addition, we also see that thalidomide is anti-angiogenic and anti-inflammatory, and this allows it to reduce tumor growth in blood vessels, which is a key mechanism in one of its anti-cancer roles. And as with any drug, of course, consumption of thalidomide will come with side effects such as drowsiness, it's again a sedative, blood clotting, rash, and in some cases a form of nerve damage known as peripheral neuropathy. Now, currently researchers are experimenting with other similarly structured drugs, which are known as analogs. So these include lenalidomide and polidomide. These differ from thalidomide by a single element. However, after some research, they've actually found that these drugs in comparison to thalidomide have reduced side effects and have a stronger ability to inhibit or stimulate certain proteins in whatever biochemical pathway they're analyzing here. All right, so here are my works cited, and thank you for your participation.
All right, thank you so much, Gerard, for that awesome presentation. We are going to go into our live Q&A now. Do we have any questions right off the bat?
I had a question. I have a comment first. I'm old enough that I was born in the 60s. So I recall my mother, when I was growing up, talking about that, and it did produce a whole generation that was very, very afraid of medications because she wouldn't take anything. She didn't trust any drugs because of that whole terrible situation. But my question is, do you know if there's still any survivors or people that are still alive that were affected and deformed from the drug today?
Yeah, so actually I wasn't directly researching like thalidomide today, but I have seen, I came across as I was researching some of kind of like the side effects of the modern use so thalidomide is still being used today to treat, as I said in the presentation, multiple myeloma. And as I was researching that, I came across like multiple accounts of survivors and how there of course still are survivors today, and many of them are still going through kind of like that. My point is, yes, there still are survivors. I'm sorry, it wasn't a huge part of my research, but I know there are still many still struggling with, its effects. And
thank you. Interesting presentation. Thank you.
For my question, I know that your presentation was mostly on the kind of chemical research behind this topic, but do you know about if there was a huge social implication about people being very afraid to take drugs after this in the 60s?
I would say definitely yes, because we kind of see it today with kind of like the COVID vaccine. If you go on, we see a lot among a ton of like anti-vax groups on social media kind of using the thalidomide disaster as a means of attacking the pharmaceutical industry and kind of, calling it, especially with how fast like the COVID vaccine was released, they kind of attack that and say that the drug is the COVID vaccine is probably dangerous. And I think that it's still definitely having, like, its social effects are still seen today. And but I would say among these groups, there's largely a misconception of how kind of like the drug regulation process has changed, because since that disaster, we now have, as I've said in the presentation, a much stronger understanding of stereochemistry and how it affects kind of like protein binding. So to answer your question, yes.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions that you can either unmute or drop in chat? Okay. Then if I can ask one more, did you have a favorite, while you're researching, did you have a favorite source that you came across?
I didn't have a particularly favorite source, or I would say for the most part, no, but I found it really helpful when I found sources that kind of gave like a multi-view of the thalidomide disaster, because a lot of sources would focus just kind of like on a specific aspect of the disaster, like its history or its or like the first synthesis that was used to create thalidomide. But when I found sources that kind of covered everything, you know, like the biochemical pathway taken by thalidomide, how it was synthesized, and its history and its use today, I found that super helpful. It was definitely hard to get through those more science-heavy sources, the ones that went in depth into like the studies used to discover that biological pathway that I talked about in my presentation, because just the names of all those like proteins and enzymes can get so long, and it I don't know, makes me dizzy. But it was definitely enjoyable reading through those, because like once I understood it, I don't know, it kind of made everything just started making more sense, and it was really nice kind of seeing everything kind of put together in a single source. And yeah.
Awesome, thank you. All right, any last questions before we wrap up?
May I ask one quick question? I wish I could ask a question more pertinent to your topic, but I have a difficulty following along in certain parts. So I just wanted to ask, what drew you to this particular topic?
So one of my career goals is to kind of go into medicinal chemistry, because I find organic chemistry really fascinating. And I really enjoy kind of like the problem-solving aspect of organic chemistry. But as for why I specifically chose thalidomide, in my OChem 1 class, we actually had this lab where we had to research the history of thalidomide. It was specifically when we were learning the stereochemistry unit. So I myself was kind of discovering what stereochemistry was and how it was important. But just that kind of like short thalidomide, that short part of the lab was not really enough for me. So I kind of wanted to go further into it, especially after taking organic chemistry too, because in OChem 2 we learn a lot more. We learn a lot more about the different functional groups and kind of expand upon our knowledge in OChem 1. So I found it was a great opportunity to kind of apply that. And yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Gerard, for your awesome presentation. And thank you everyone for your wonderful questions and coming to participate in today's Omni session. That's going to be it for today. And we always ask you to come back for tomorrow's and Thursday's sessions just to learn more about our program and our students and their wonderful research. So that's it for today. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much.